Have you ever wondered what it's like to be the daughter of the most famous man in the world? What if I told you that Walt Disney's two daughters lived in a real-life story darker than any Disney movie? Forget the fairy tales. This is about family fights, $400 million, and secrets that Disney never wanted you to know. By the time I'm done telling you this story, you'll see why being a Disney princess in real life was anything but magical. And warning, what happened to these sisters will shock you. Let me take you behind the scenes of the Disney family. This isn't about cartoons or theme parks. This is about real people, real money, and real drama. Our story starts on December 18, 1933. That's when Diane Disney was born. The newspapers went crazy. "Mickey Mouse has a daughter," they wrote. Walt and his wife Lillian had been trying to have a baby for years. They'd had several miscarriages, so Diane was like a miracle to them. Walt was so happy that he bought a pony for the baby before she was even born. Can you imagine? That's how excited he was to be a dad. But here's something most people don't know. The Disney family was scared. Really scared. Just a year before Diane was born, someone kidnapped Charles Lindbergh's baby. You know, the famous pilot? His baby was stolen and killed. It was the biggest news story in America. Every rich family was terrified it could happen to them. So Walt and Lillian decided to keep their daughter hidden from the public. No photos in magazines. No public appearances. Nothing. 3 years later, in 1936, the Disney family grew again. But this time they kept it super secret. Sharon Disney was adopted as a baby. Walt and Lillian didn't tell anyone she was adopted. Not even their close friends knew. Why? Because back then, people looked down on adoption. They thought it was shameful, and Walt Disney couldn't have any bad publicity. He had an image to protect. Diane remembered the day Sharon came home. She was 3 years old, looking into her new baby sister's crib. She had no idea that this tiny baby would one day be part of the biggest family fight over money that Hollywood had ever seen. Now you might think growing up as Walt Disney's daughter would be amazing. Private planes, movie premieres, meeting famous people, right? Wrong. It was nothing like that. Diane and Sharon lived normal lives. Well, as normal as possible when your dad is Walt Disney. They went to regular schools. They had regular friends. Walt taught them to swim and ride horses. He helped with their homework and made props for their school plays. Sharon once said something that really shows what their childhood was like. She said, "We never grew up thinking our father was a great man. He was just daddy." That's pretty amazing when you think about it. To the world, he was Walt Disney. To them, he was just dad. But here's the coolest part of their childhood. These two little girls actually inspired Disneyland. No joke. Here's how it happened. Walt used to take his daughters to Griffith Park in Los Angeles. They loved riding the carousel there. They'd ride it over and over while Walt sat on a bench, watching and waiting. And he was bored. Really bored. That's when Walt had his big idea. He thought, why isn't there a place where kids and parents can have fun together? That simple thought while watching his daughters on a carousel led to Disneyland. Without Diane and Sharon, there might never have been a Magic Kingdom. Think about that next time you're at Disney World. As the girls grew up, their lives took very different paths. Diane went to USC for college. She studied English and met a football player named Ron Miller on a blind date. They fell in love and got married in 1954. Walt cried during the whole wedding ceremony. He was so emotional about his little girl getting married. Ron later joined the Disney company, and even became the CEO. Diane and Ron had 7 children together. 7. They seemed to have the perfect life. Sharon's life was more complicated. She married a man named Robert Brown in 1959. They had a daughter named Victoria. But then tragedy struck. Robert got cancer and died in 1967. He was young, and Sharon was only 30 years old. Even worse, this happened just a few months after Walt Disney himself died. So Sharon lost her husband and her father in the same year. Can you imagine how hard that must have been? Sharon married again in 1969. Her new husband was William Lund, a real estate developer. Fun fact, he's the guy who helped find the land for Disney World in Florida. Sharon and William had twins named Brad and Michelle in 1970. But this marriage didn't last either. Sharon filed for divorce in 1976. Now, here's where the story starts to get really interesting. And by interesting, I mean complicated. While Diane stayed out of the spotlight and focused on raising her kids, Sharon jumped into the business world. She joined the board of directors of the Disney Company in 1984. She was involved in Retlaw Enterprises, which was the family's private company. That's Walter spelled backward. By the way, pretty clever, right? But death wasn't done with the Disney family. Sharon got breast cancer and died in 1993. She was only 56 years old. Way too young. And when she died, that's when all the trouble started. Sharon left her 3 kids, Victoria, Brad, and Michelle, a trust fund worth $400 million. That's right, $400 million. You'd think her kids would be set for life, right? Wrong. This is where the story gets crazy. The trust had a special rule, a terrible rule, as it turned out. The trustees, Mishids, the people in charge of the money, could refuse to give the kids their inheritance if they thought the kids weren't mature enough or couldn't handle the money properly. The kids were supposed to get money at age 35, then more at 40, and more at 45. But the trustees could say no if they wanted to. Victoria, the oldest, had problems with drug addiction. She got her money at age 35, but she died just 1 year later. Her share of the money then went to her half-brother and half-sister, Brad and Michelle. Michelle had a brain aneurysm, which is a serious brain problem. But she still got her money at 35 and 40. The trustees thought she could handle it. But Brad, poor Brad, got nothing. When he turned 35, the trustees said no. When he turned 40, they said no again. When he turned 45, still no. They said he had cognitive problems and couldn't manage the money. We're talking about $200 million here. His own inheritance, and he couldn't touch it. This started a war in the family. Brad sued the trustees. He said they were keeping his money from him unfairly. The trustees fought back. Family members took sides. It was ugly. Really ugly. The courts usually sided with the trustees, saying they had the right to keep the money from Brad. But the fighting tore the family apart. Meanwhile, Diane was doing something completely different with her life. After her mother Lillian died in 1997, Diane noticed something wrong. People were starting to forget who Walt Disney really was. He was becoming just a logo, a brand. The real man was being lost in the myth. So Diane, who had always been private, decided to go public. She had a mission: save her father's true story. And boy did she succeed. First she fought for the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles. Her mother had donated money to build it. But after Lillian died, the project stopped. People wanted to change the design, make it cheaper, and more ordinary. Diane said no way. She fought like crazy to keep the original design by architect Frank Gehry. When people tried to compromise, Diane used the family's money as a weapon. She basically said, keep the original design, or you get no money. Her husband Ron said she was tougher than hell when she was fighting for what she believed in. The concert hall finally opened in 2003. It cost $274 million and is one of the most beautiful buildings in Los Angeles. But Diane wasn't done. She also created the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. This wasn't going to be some fake glossy tribute. Diane wanted the truth. She wanted to show her father as a real person. Talented but flawed, brilliant but human. The museum opened in 2009. It's completely separate from the Disney Company, which is important. It means they can tell the real story, not just the corporate version. But my favorite thing about Diane, she and Ron bought a vineyard in Napa Valley in 1981. They called it Silverado Vineyards. They made great wine, but more importantly, they helped their community. They paid for health care for vineyard workers. They supported local music festivals. They made Napa their real home, away from all the Disney craziness. The difference between the two sisters' legacies is heartbreaking. Sharon is remembered for the family fight over her money. Diane is remembered for buildings, museums, and helping people. When Diane died in 2013 at age 79, after falling, thousands of people mourned her. She had touched so many lives. The movie Saving Mr. Banks was dedicated to her memory. But Sharon's legacy, it's all about lawyers and lawsuits. Sure, there's a dance school named after her at Cal Arts. There's a medical facility at Children's Hospital. But when people think of Sharon Disney, they think of the trust fund battle that's still going on today. Here's what really gets me about this story. These weren't just spoiled rich kids fighting over daddy's money. These were two women trying to honor their father in different ways. Sharon thought getting involved in the company was the right thing to do. Diane thought preserving his true story was more important. Both were probably right in their own way. The trust fund disaster is especially sad. Sharon probably thought she was protecting her kids. She didn't want them to waste the money or be taken advantage of. Instead, she created a system that turned them against each other. Victoria died young. Michelle struggled with health problems. Brad spent his whole adult life fighting for money that should have been his. All because of a few sentences in a legal document. Think about what it was really like to be Walt Disney's daughter. Everyone expected you to be perfect. Everyone watched your every move. You could never just be yourself. You were always Walt Disney's daughter first, and yourself second. That's a heavy burden for anyone to carry. Diane found a way to handle it. She stayed private when she was young, then used her position to do good things when she got older. She protected her father's legacy while building her own. Sharon tried to follow a more traditional path, dining the company, being on boards, but it didn't work out as well. The saddest part of this whole story, Walt Disney spent his life creating stories about families sticking together, about love conquering all, about happily ever after. But his own family's story is a warning about what happens when money gets in the way of love. When trying to protect someone actually hurts them. When good intentions lead to terrible results. So what can we learn from all this? A few things, I think. First, money doesn't solve problems. It often creates them. Second, how you set up your will and trusts really matters. One wrong clause can destroy a family. Third, being famous isn't always great. Sometimes it's actually really hard. But here's the biggest lesson: legacy isn't about money. It's about what you do with your life. Diane Disney Miller will be remembered for the concert hall, the museum, and all the people she helped. That's a legacy worth having. Sharon's legal battles, that's a warning about what not to do. The next time you visit Disneyland or watch a Disney movie, remember the real Disney daughters. Not princesses in castles, but real women who lived with the blessing and curse of being Walt Disney's children. One found a way to create her own magic. The other got lost in the complications of wealth and family. Their story reminds us that behind every famous person is a family dealing with very real problems. Fame and money don't protect you from pain, loss, or family fights. In fact, they often make things worse. Walt Disney created a magic kingdom, but he couldn't protect his daughters from the problems that money brings. So what happened to Walt Disney's daughters? They lived complicated lives in the shadow of their famous father. One daughter's story ended with museums and concert halls. The other's ended with lawsuits and family feuds. Neither got a fairy tale ending, but their stories teach us important lessons about family, money, and the price of fame. And that's the real story of Walt Disney's daughters. It's not a fairy tale, but it's true. And sometimes the truth is more interesting than any story Walt Disney ever told. The magic of Disney will live forever, but the story of his daughters reminds us that even in the happiest place on earth, real life has a way of breaking through. Because in the end we're all just people trying to do our best, whether our last name is Disney or not.